specific strategies that will attract more companies to the county and create more jobs. Gentlemen, I ask each of you to answer that, starting with Mr. Bramson.
Well, in many ways, that is the key question. How are we going to have a growing, thriving economy that creates opportunities for upward mobility for folks who need jobs, provides for investment in the urban centers that most need it, and strengthens our commercial tax base so that less of a burden is placed on homeowners who are really pressed to the limit. And this requires a multi-layered strategy. It's not enough just to provide a tax incentive or low-cost financing for particular deals. We have to change the overall equation so that Westchester will be more hospitable to businesses and to entrepreneurs. And I'd say at least several things need to happen. Number one, we need to be thinking about the fabric of our land use regulations. Are we permitting growth in the right places, where the investment will do the most good, where we can shorten the distance between home and work, and where we can be more reliant on mass transit and less reliant on the automobile? Absolutely critical in terms of economic growth and our quality of life. Second, infrastructure, especially transportation infrastructure. Are we investing in it in an appropriate way? Not just depreciated assets that need replacement, but actually strategic investments that can unlock the economic potential of particular locations. And our people and the skills they have. Do we have employees and potential employees here in Westchester who can seize the jobs of the future and also serve as magnets for those jobs? And that requires attention all the way from early childhood through the pipeline to post-secondary education and eventually training for specific job opportunities. And it requires partnerships between the government and not-for-profit. So we have to look at this comprehensively. And if you speak to lots of large corporations or large commercial property owners, they'll tell you one of the first questions that's asked when someone is considering Westchester is, where are my employees going to live and how are they going to get to work? And unless we have a good answer to that question, we don't have a good economic development strategy, and that's how we have to approach this.
Mr. Astorino.
I'm very proud of what we have done in this county over 4 years. And let's talk about the economy and how we've bounced back because of the policies that we put in place, which has made Westchester much more business friendly. We have businesses that are not only staying here, but coming here because it is a more tax-friendly environment, at least with the county is concerned. So when we came here 4 years ago, the county taxes had gone up 17% in the previous 5 years. In the previous 3 budgets that I've submitted, and in the next one that I will in a month, we have reduced the property tax levy by 2%. There are only 4 counties in New York State out of the 62 that have less of a budget today than they did 4 years ago. Wayne County, Schenectady, and Orange, and Westchester. And according to the state controller, only Westchester has the biggest reduction, $172 million less today we're spending than 4 years ago. Hard work, but it's also a signal to businesses that we're serious about having a stable environment so they can come in and do business here. Let's take PepsiCo, for instance, and then I'll talk about Robert Weiss and this building. PepsiCo decided early on when Governor Patterson came out with a proposed sugar tax in 2010 that they were ready to leave. They were going to go to Plano, Texas, and leave their world headquarters right here in Purchase. And we came in and very publicly lobbied against the sugar tax and others, and that tax was killed. And then we met with senior executives at PepsiCo and said, what will it take to keep you here? 1,100 families depend on that job at PepsiCo. We worked with the governor's office, put an incentive package together. PepsiCo not only is staying here, but they're doubling down on this county. They are knocking down their whole corporate building, building another one, adding over 1,000 construction jobs, spending over $250 million. That's great news. That's only one example. I can't wait to tell you about all the other ones today. And with regard to the building here, the Taj Mahal, which is the old craft building that Robert Weiss owns, that's what's happening today. Buildings are being repurposed, not for one big single tenant, that doesn't exist anymore, but repurposed for new employees and new businesses.
Mr. Bramson, if you'd like, I'll offer you 90 seconds to rebut.
Yeah, I'd like to extend the conversation because I think it's critically important. You know, a number of times Rob has referred back to 2009. I'd remind him that the dynamic is very different right now. It's not the same election that it was then, and at that point we were in the middle of the worst national recession since the Great Depression. So of course things are better now because the economy broadly has recovered, but claiming credit for that is like claiming credit for the sunshine or for the sunrise. The issue is whether we're engaged in policy making right now that will improve our lives in the future. That's the standard we need to consider in this election. And just reviewing the various items that Rob ticked off, talked about a 2% reduction in the county's tax levy. I have to remind Rob, he actually vetoed that budget. And the 2% reduction was approved over his veto. And I think there's something unseemly about claiming credit for other people's work. And perhaps more importantly, the stability in the county's budget has been achieved by borrowing tens of millions of dollars to fund the county's operations, which is completely unsustainable. It only intensifies budget pressures down the road. And finally, by the metric that counts to businesses and taxpayers, how much are you paying every year for public services? Taxes have gone up, way up in the last 4 years. As I said earlier, $800 million and more. Rob's own taxes are up 25% in the last 4 years. So this strategy is not working. And unless we look at this comprehensively through a mechanism of shared services that can reduce the overall cost of government, we're not going to really get our hands on the problem. That's our responsibility as regional leaders.
Mr. Astorino?
Oh, taxes? Okay, let's talk taxes for a second here. So we get into office and they had gone up 17% in the last 5 years. What did we do? We arrested that problem. The arrow's not going up anymore. The arrow is going where it should, down. And that took a lot of hard work. Now let's talk about New Rochelle. So in that 2009, when the economy was in a tailspin, when people could not afford to stay in their homes, when their 401ks were half what they were, when they were taking from their kids' college accounts to pay for the cable bill and just to keep the lights on, what was happening in New Rochelle? The taxes were going up at an average of 7% a year. He's raised taxes 109% over 16 budgets. That's 7% a year. You think that's acceptable? That's why businesses aren't going to New Rochelle. That's why seniors can't stay in their home. But here's the worst part of it. The worst part of it. What did he do for himself? His first year as an appointed part-time mayor, he accepts and votes for a 40% pay hike to $89,000. And when the economy was really going bad and people were losing their jobs, he could have said no to that. But what did he do? He did the opposite of what should have been done. He took it to $89,000 as a part-time ceremonial mayor. Raise your hand if you got a 40% pay raise. You're lucky to keep your job. That's the wrong example. We cut my staff 19% to set the example. We started paying for health care like everyone else to set the example. Raising taxes 109% is what is wrong with the way the county was going. We corrected that.
You know what, I want to keep this topic going.
Please.
I don't know if there's any more important topic that we'll talk about tonight. I've learned a lot about what's happened in the last 4 years. I'd like to go back to my original question and ask each of you, and let's give you the 90-second rebuttal time.
Yeah.
What is your plan moving forward to proactively solicit more companies to come to Westchester? Mr. Bramson.
Steve, I want to get into that because it's critical, but I would like an opportunity to react to the comments that Rob just made, if you'll permit me. And then
90 seconds.
And then we can move on. So, just to state it bluntly, Rob is lying about my record because he doesn't want people to know the truth about his record. And he hopes that these kinds of statements will serve as a distraction. 5 of his specific claims were ruled unfair and untrue by the Westchester Fair Campaign Practices Committee, an independent, nonpartisan organization that has ruled in favor of Democrats and Republicans. That 109% statistic that you just heard a moment ago, if you look at the same period of time in every big city of Westchester County, turns out that the rate of change in New Rochelle was the lowest. And today, New Rochelle has the lowest municipal tax rate of those same large cities. That's the truth, and that's the fact. And I must say, this claim of part-time mayor, which you hear all the time, governing a diverse, complex city of 80,000 requires an enormous amount of attention. And I have thrown myself into every kind of challenge because I know that's my job when people entrust me with leadership. And when I think about the level of neglect, Rob, of economic policy, environmental policy, the lack of energy applied to resolving the duplication and waste among different public institutions in Westchester, the failure to address human services in a way that will encourage independence, the failure to comply with Safe Drinking Water Act or to comply with the housing settlement, I'm wondering if you're showing up for work at all. And that's a question that needs to be asked because we have a job to do in this county and it's not being done right now.
Let me
Mr.
respond to
Astorino,
that for
90
1 second,
seconds.
okay? If you think working 40 hours a week gives you the audacity to take a 40% pay hike to $89,000 on a part-time job, then we have very different philosophies of what it's like to work. People were losing their jobs. People couldn't pay for their mortgages. And you sat there and took a 40% pay hike. And here's how he did it. Fire and police were cut by 20%. And the reserve funds in the budget went from $14 million under his stewardship to a little over $1 million. So how did he do it? He had the audacity to stick his hand in the reserve funds, take money for his pay hike, and thinks because he works hard that that is appropriate. It's not appropriate. I haven't taken a pay hike in my 4 years. I paid for health insurance. You took a law that is on the books, you didn't have to, that gives lifetime health benefits to someone who's on the payroll for at least 5 years in Rochelle. I don't think that's appropriate for a part-time mayor.
Steve, if I may, I'm sorry, but you know, it's may I
No, you know what? This is important.
Yeah. So
we need to hash this out, but we do need to move on. Let's give you 60 seconds from here.
you know what the difference between you and I, Rob, is? I chose to voluntarily contribute 18% of my health insurance costs. I never made a big deal about it. I didn't send out a press release. I never even told anyone about it until it was raised in this campaign. I did it just because I thought it was the right thing to do and because it set the right example. And for me, leadership is about more than marketing. It's about the substance of what you accomplish. So you talked about audacity in this kind of sing-song way, which I think is reduces the quality of the discussion we should be having. I'll tell you what strikes me as audacity. Cutting childcare for working families, cutting eviction prevention programs, cutting neighborhood health centers, and at the same time, keeping dozens of patronage positions for people whose only qualification is their involvement in the political process and not their qualifications for the job they're supposed to do. I think audacity is claiming a great budgetary accomplishment when all you've done is borrow tens of millions of dollars in order to get there, and while taxes for the typical taxpayer are still going through the roof, and having no strategy whatsoever for growing our economy in a way that's sustainable, that will create jobs and protect our environment. That's audacity.
60 seconds.
Oh, we're getting better. Look, the truth hurts, Noam. You had a choice. You took the 40% pay raise to $89,000 for a part-time job. It's part-time. You check that off on your own personnel records. You know it's a part-time job. We'll produce that for anyone who wants to see it. You can say all you want, but while seniors were struggling, while businesses were closing, while we were in a tailspin, the worst thing you should have done as a, quote, leader is take that pay hike. So if you think it's appropriate, you can defend that. If you think it's appropriate that someone in his 30s, after just 5 years on the job, gets lifetime benefits, go right ahead. That's your prerogative. That's not the way I lead. I led by example and said, I'm going to start contributing to healthcare, and we're going to pass a law that makes all management and non-union do it. We led by example because we were going in negotiations. All of our unions never contributed to their healthcare. 100% paid by taxpayers. I said, that's never happening again. Taxpayer can't foot 100% of that. That's ludicrous. So now we've signed 5 of our unions are paying for the healthcare, just like everyone else. And new hires are paying in retirement. That's the first time that's ever happened. So we have changed the structure in a real way that benefits taxpayers now and forever. And when we talk about the economy, we're going to talk about the 27,000 new jobs that have been created over the last 4 years, because the business climate in Westchester is much better today than it was 4 years ago.
You know what, we could go back and forth on this, I think, for quite a while. I want to roll into the next question. I'm still looking, by the way, I think, for an answer from my original question. But I'm going to roll it into this next one. Westchester has lost several large companies that have moved to Fairfield County. Fairfield has been proactively soliciting or poaching, if you will, large companies to move from Stamford and elsewhere in Fairfield County. What